Hi, artists. I wanted to take a moment and just explain that everything is okay with me. My daughter has seasonal allergies, and she woke up today is Sunday, she woke up this morning with some congestion, some drainage, and a slight cough. These are all things that she's experienced before with allergies, but due to the ASM's new protocol, she cannot return to school until she has a doctor's note. And unfortunately, she wasn't able to get in to see a doctor today. So we're just waiting for her to see a doctor so she can get a doctor's note and we can return to school. So all is good. I thought it would be easier if I did more of a virtual lesson today and have the substitute present it to you guys. So that way you're learning the lesson from myself. The first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys a minute or two to upload your recreation photos to Google Classroom. So if you remember from last class period, you could have recreated the Caravaggio's Medusa. You could have recreated the teacup that was on Google Classroom, or you could have recreated from an art piece that you chose. And you're using non-traditional art materials in order to recreate those. So I'm going to have the substitute pause this presentation and then give you guys a minute or two to get started. Uploading your images if you haven't done so already. And she or he is also going to pass out a Post-it note to each of you guys, as well as large drawing paper. So now each of you guys has a Post-it note or a scratch sheet of paper and a larger piece of paper. What I want you to use right now is that Post-it note or scratch sheet of paper. Last class period, I gave you guys instructions in order to create a work of art. And I want you guys now to be the one making the instructions and then giving those instructions to another person in the class to create artwork from. So what we see here where it says make a plan, I do not want you writing these questions on your Post-it notes. These are questions that I want you asking yourselves, the architects, and what you're going to include on your Post-it. So let me show you an example here. On your Post-it note for your plan, I want you to ask yourself these questions and then respond. Think of a hypothetical layout that you would want a student in the class to recreate. So what you will ask yourself, do you want the student in class to use shapes or use lines? For my scenario on my Post-it, I want the artist to only use lines. So I'm going to write down use only, and you'll notice I put the word thin lines. Remember when we were doing our practice formatives last class period, we talked about how we have to be very specific in our instructions. So I don't want my artists to use shapes. I want them to use lines, but I want them to use thin lines. How many lines, because we're not doing shape, or my artist, isn't using shapes, how many lines do I want them to draw? Well, I don't want to give my artist a set number. I want them just to go with it. And I want them to keep going until the paper is mostly filled. What direction do I want them to draw in? Well, I think I want my artist to start from the center. So maybe like a central axis. And I want them to create lines outward, almost resembling like a flower or like a starburst. Okay. What type of line do I want them to create? I want them to use wavy and curvy lines. What tool do I want them to use? I want them to use a black pen or maybe like a fine tip black marker. Okay. Do I want my artist to use any color? No, I don't want my artist to use color. However, I might see some contrast or darker areas as the lines get closer together. So basing my directions off of the questions that I've provided here on the left, I'm going to write out very detailed instructions on my Post-it. And you can use front and back of the Post-it if you need to. So this is like my hypothetical drawing. I've given these instructions to another student in the class, and this is the hypothetical drawing that they've come up with. So let's just clarify here. I wanted them to use only thin lines. Looking at the example, yeah, it looks like they only use thin lines. There's also a number of lines being used, and that's because I didn't give a set number. I wanted them to keep going until they mostly filled the paper. And they did. They have all of these lines, they kept going, and they filled the majority of the paper. I also want the artist to start from the center and create lines outward like a flower or a starburst. So if we look closely, I see that there's kind of like this central axis right here, and I can see that the lines that they've created are going outward like a flower or a starburst. I also wanted them to use wavy or curvy lines, and they did. The lines that they created, they're not straight, they're going outward from a central axis, and they're curvy and waved. I also wanted them to use a black pen or a fine point black marker, and they did. There's no color that's represented, so that falls into here. No color is used, but there is occasional contrast as the lines get closer together, and we can see that. We can see that more so in the middle here. So as some of the lines are really close together, we can start to see some of that contrast. So here's the plan or the directions that I made on my Post-it, and this is what I envision the student to create on their larger piece of paper. So let's do another example. Here are my questions that I'm asking each of you. And this is the plan on the Post-it. So what shapes or lines will be used? For this example, I want them to use large and small circles. I don't want them to use lines. How many shapes will be drawn? Well, I want them to create one large circle that fills the page. And I'm going to be more detailed. I want them to draw this lightly in pencil first because I want them to erase it later. I also want them to use smaller circles on the inside to fill the entire large circle. And I want them to think of this more so as dots or filled in circles. Okay. What direction will these shapes be created or drawn, and what type of shape will be created? Well, I want them, once again, to use dots or filled in circles, and they should be spread out enough. I don't want my dots or circles to be touching one another. I also want them to use varied sizes. So in their drawing, I should see some bigger dots or filled in circles and some smaller dots and filled in circles. What tool do I want them to use? I want them to use black pen or marker or black marker for their dots. I also do not want them to outline the larger circle. I want them to erase that once that's filled in. Do I want them to add color? No, I don't want any color used. So here's the plan that I wrote down on my Post-it based on the questions that I've asked you. And this is kind of like the hypothetical drawing. Okay, this is what I envisioned them doing, or what I envisioned that final piece to look like based on my plan. Let's do one more example. Here are the instructions that I've given to you. Here is the plan that I'm putting on my Post-it. What shapes or lines will be used? For this, I want them to use both lines and shapes. I want them to use one medium-sized circle, and then I also want them to use lines. How many lines or shapes will be drawn? Well, I want them to draw one medium circle in the center. I'm very detailed, very specific. I want them to draw lightly in pencil first because I want it to be erased later. I also want them to use not just straight lines, but thin straight lines. And I want those lines to be on the outside of the circle that connect to one another. What direction will the lines be drawn in? Alternate directions. I'm not saying that they have to do all straight up and down, all left and right. I want them to go all different ways, so I'm putting alternate directions. What type of line shapes will be created? Well, I want varied sizes of straight lines. Notice I put the word straight in here because I need to be specific. What tool do I want them to use? I want them to use a black pen, but I do not want them to outline the medium circle because I want that to be erased once it's filled in. Do I want color? No, I don't want them to be colored. So this is my hypothetical drawing that I envision the student to create. Okay. Now, what happens, I've given you guys these questions to kind of think about, but I'm still struggling. I still need suggestions. I don't know what to do. So for those students that are unsure about how to get started, these are my suggestions for you. One suggestion would be to Google line drawings. Look at the various line drawings that you see in Google. Find one that you think is interesting, and then use that as a guide to complete your plan. So for example, if this was something that I found on Google not Google Classroom, on Google, I found this line drawing, which I did. I found this line drawing. So now I need to think about how would I explain to the student how to create this? Okay, how would I explain that on my Post-it note? So that's one suggestion if you don't know how to come up with a design on your own. The other suggestion is maybe on a scratch sheet of paper, maybe you need to doodle something out first. You just really quickly doodle using shapes and lines. Once you've created that doodle, then you can go in and think about, okay, what steps did I create, or what steps did I use to create this doodle? And then you'll jot those steps down on your Post-it. Now, the person that's going to be creating the artwork based on your plan may or may not create a doodle based on what you're envisioning. And that's okay. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. So what I would like you guys to do right now is I want you to, once you've created your instructions on your Post-it, I'm going to give you guys, let's do 5 to 10 minutes. Your sub will kind of gauge depending on how many people are finishing quickly or not. So about 5 to 10 minutes, create your Post-it directions. And then what I would like you to do is I want you to pass it to your Post-it. I want you to pass it to the person that's in front of you. The person that is sitting in front of you will be creating a drawing based on your directions. Now, the first person that's sitting at the front of your row, you will bring your Post-it, to the person that is sitting in the back. Once you've gotten your Post-it, then you can take your large sheet of paper that your substitute has given to you, and you can either stay at your desk, or fortunately for us, we have that big hallway space. If you want to safely distance yourself from other people out in the hallway and work on the floor, you're more than welcome to do that. I just ask that you keep it quiet in the hallway because there are other classes and teachers working in their offices during this time. Make sure that you are spread out. Make sure that you bring your materials with you if you choose to go out in the hallway to work. I'm going to have the substitute set a timer for, let's say, 20 minutes to work on these layouts, and then you'll come together as a class, even if your drawing is not completed at the end of the 20 minutes. Artists that are working on your drawings, please take your time. Use the entire paper that has been given to you. If you need to use like a straight edge, if you don't have a ruler, you can use your sketchbooks as a straight edge for your lines. If you need to use a circle stencil, try to find something in the classroom that has a round bottom to it that you can trace. Maybe you want to use pencil first, so that way if you need to erase, you can do so. So please utilize the full 20 minutes. Take your time, think about quality and craftsmanship while you are working.